At 6, the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock is suspended from the Conservative Party after signing up to a reality TV show. He is swapping Westminster for the jungle as he flies to Australia to take part in ITV's I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, leaving some of his constituents unimpressed.
It's ridiculous. I think it's a shame that he thinks that's a better use of time than serving his constituents.
But he's not taking the job very seriously, you know what I mean? Like being in politics and going on telly and acting a clown.
Also on the programme tonight, police name the man who threw petrol bombs at an immigration processing centre in Dover on Sunday. 66-year-old Andrew Leake was later found dead. More bumper profits for BP, £7.1 billion for the oil giant over the summer, more than double what it was the year before. And a famous football that could fetch £3 million at auction. It's the Hand of God ball used by Maradona at the 1986 World Cup.
And on BBC London at 6:30, the mother of one of the victims of the Brixton shooting tells of her heartbreak. Her son came to London for a better life.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The former Health Secretary Matt Hancock has been suspended as a Conservative MP after becoming a surprise addition to the cast of the reality TV show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Instead of representing his West Suffolk constituents in Westminster, he will be joining the other contenders in the Australian jungle from next week. It's understood that Matt Hancock wants to use his appearance to promote his campaign on dyslexia. The Prime Minister's spokesman said Rishi Sunak believes MPs should be working hard for their constituents at a challenging time for the country. Our Deputy Political Editor Vicky Young has the story.
There are plenty of ways a politician can get their message across, and Matt Hancock has never been one to shun the limelight. He even launched his own app. His most prominent role in government was as Health Secretary during the COVID pandemic.
Good afternoon and welcome to Downing Street.
His latest challenge involves up to 3 weeks in the Australian outback, where tasks include eating insects and animal parts. Some Conservative colleagues aren't impressed.
It's clearly wrong to do that while Parliament is sitting. I mean, what he chooses to use his recess for is a matter for him. But Parliament is sitting. We're elected to serve our constituents. That's the job we're there to do.
And those who lost relatives during the pandemic think he should be concentrating on the public inquiry into how it was handled.
To say I'm angry would be an understatement. I think it's a disgrace. I think he is shameless in his very, I feel, obvious attempt to rehabilitate his public image.
The Prime Minister overlooked Mr Hancock when he put together his new team last week. Friends say he doesn't expect to return to government, so this is a way to show the human side of politics and promote his dyslexia campaign to millions of viewers.
You've got to pick your battles here in the jungle.
Kezia Dugdale was a member of the Scottish Parliament when she appeared on the programme.
I never went into the jungle thinking I was going to get all these celebrities talking about tax policy around the fireplace, but I did think there was a chance that we might be able to talk about politics or some of the big issues. There is an opportunity here for him to talk about an issue, and that could be something like his own dyslexia. That could be really empowering and really helpful or comforting to a lot of people around the country. But it's undoubtedly a very risky decision for him.
Mr Hancock's ministerial career was ruined by bad publicity when he was caught having an affair with his friend and advisor Gina Coladangelo and had to resign for breaking COVID lockdown rules. So will a stint in the jungle help or hinder his career? It didn't do Nadine Dorries any harm.
Oh God, it's horrible!
She was suspended from the Parliamentary Conservative Party for a few months, but later became Culture Secretary. And Penny Mordaunt made a splash on another TV show. She's now in the Cabinet after standing as leader. But what do Mr Hancock's constituents in West Suffolk think?
Oh, geez, well, he's not taking the job very seriously, you know what I mean? Like being in politics and going on telly and acting a clown, you know? He needs to really look after the country before he goes and does all that stuff, you know?
Well, I mean, it's ridiculous. I think it's a shame that he thinks that's a better use of time than serving his constituents, and I'm not really sure why that's his priority.
Some colleagues aren't surprised at all this and say there's no stopping the former Health Secretary's desire for publicity. Now, there will be plenty of people wondering how an MP paid more than £80,000 a year can just swan off to Australia and be paid a pretty hefty fee to do that as well. Matt Hancock's local party, well, they sound pretty furious, saying they think it's a serious error of judgment. His friends say that it's a chance for him to engage with millions of people, and he will be giving a donation to a local charity. He has, of course, been suspended from the Tory party in Parliament. The Prime Minister's official spokesman also sounding unimpressed, saying at a difficult time for constituents, all MPs should be working hard, and added that it was unlikely that Rishi Sunak would be watching the programme.
Vicky Young, thank you. Counter-terrorism police have taken over the investigation into the firebombing of an immigration processing centre on Sunday. Police have named the 66-year-old suspect, who was later found dead at a petrol station. Meanwhile, the Chief Inspector of Prisons says conditions at the Manston Migrant Processing Centre in Kent have worsened since the summer, describing them as wretched. Today, coaches have continued to move migrants from the camp, taking them to a hotel at Heathrow. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford has the latest from Kent.
Sunday's firebomb attack on a migrant processing centre in Dover now being treated by police as a terrorist incident. The suspect, Andrew Leake, took his own life at a nearby petrol station, but searches of his home in High Wycombe have revealed a possible terrorist motivation for the attack. High winds in the Channel today meant that no migrants were daring to set out in small boats, but with 48 people having crossed yesterday, the total who've made the journey this year is creeping closer and closer to 40,000. It's led to a crisis at the makeshift immigration processing centre at Manston, 20 miles away. Up to 1,000 migrants were supposed to stay here for about 24 hours to do their initial paperwork. The Chief Inspector of Prisons said conditions in the centre were OK in July, but it is now holding up to 4,000 people, and some are spending a month sleeping on the floor.
What we're saying to the Home Office is really get a grip. Because of the concerns that have been raised by a number of sources, we've actually decided that we will return to the site and re-inspect again in the near future.
The government's first move towards getting a grip has been to drive a few hundred migrants out of the centre today. One coachload of young men was taken to a hotel near Heathrow Airport, where they got off, each clutching a blue plastic bag of belongings.
What we have to do at Manston is ensure that it returns to a well-run, compassionate, humane site which can manage around 1,000 to 2,000 individuals. At the moment it's got significantly more than that. We're working intensely now, every day, to reduce that population.
Natasha Roots and her family live 50 metres from the Manston fence. She told me she's concerned that she now finds herself living next to what is almost a prison.
And my children go out and play in the street. If they decide to break out because they've got nothing left to live for, God knows what could happen. If something like Dover happens, or they decide to have a riot or break out.
The numbers being held at Manston have now started to reduce as the government moves migrants by coach to hotels away from Kent. But ministers still seem unable to reduce the numbers crossing the Channel in the first place. The Immigration Minister said today that the Prime Minister was very focused on the migrant crisis. He said the government would be looking at radical options to ensure that economic migrants are quickly returned to their countries of origin and to try to deter people from coming to the UK in the first place. But the opposition said that the Home Secretary's language yesterday, in which she described an invasion of southern Britain, had done nothing to help.
Daniel Sanford, thank you. So almost 40,000 people have crossed the English Channel in small boats this year, a record number. But how does that compare to the number of asylum seekers who've been smuggled across the Channel on the back of lorries, for example, over the years? And how does the situation here now compare to EU countries? Our Home Editor, Mark Easton, has been looking at the figures. Mark.
Thanks, Sophie. So Britain's asylum system is in crisis. That is according to the Home Secretary. And here is evidence. These photographs obtained by the BBC were taken inside a Home Office facility in Dover in the last 10 days. They show unaccompanied children who've arrived in small boats sleeping on thin mats under blankets on the floor of what is an office waiting room. Now, we don't know much about the youngsters other than they're deemed to be under 18 and are seeking asylum in the UK. Just a handful from the increasing numbers coming across the Channel. There were 300 people in 2018, and as we've just heard, 40,000 this year already. So is Britain experiencing unusual pressures? Over the last 40 years, there have been peaks and troughs in UK asylum claims, depending on wars and displacement. There were spikes in the early 90s and early noughties. Since then, the picture has stabilised. The method of arrival has shifted from hiding in the back of lorries to small boats in the Channel. But even though last year saw around 56,000 asylum seekers arriving, that's still well below the numbers, as you can see, 20 years ago. So is the UK unusual in having so many people asking for sanctuary? Well, no. Germany, France and Spain all had more asylum applications than Britain last year. And when you compare the numbers to population, well, the UK is down here in 19th place in Europe in terms of the impact.
The biggest challenge, I think, in the UK system at the moment is that there just doesn't seem to be enough processing capacity to make decisions on people's applications. We know that asylum application numbers go up and down, so part of the job of government is to put in place resources to deal with that, because at the moment we have a big backlog building up of people who are waiting over a year in most cases, sometimes even 2 or 3 years to get an initial decision on their application.
Now, France saw more than 120,000 people claiming asylum last year, and that's double the number in Britain. Some, of course, arrive and hope to leave the French coast and seek asylum here in the UK. But are they within their rights to do so? The UK government argues they should claim in France, which is a safe country. So what does the law say? Well, the Refugee Convention says states shall not impose penalties on refugees coming directly from a territory where their life or freedom was threatened, coming directly. But the UN says asylum seekers don't have to claim in the first safe country that they reach. Now, the government wants to deter asylum seekers from coming to Britain by unofficial routes, criminalising their arrival and threatening to send, as we know, some to Rwanda. The Home Secretary has talked of capping the number who can come. But refugee agencies say what's needed are long-term solutions, a network of safe routes and considering perhaps some asylum claims overseas. What almost everyone agrees is that there's no quick fix. Sophie.
Mark, thank you. Police are investigating the death of an 88-year-old woman after she was allegedly attacked at a care home in Bedfordshire. Sheila Hartman, who had dementia, was taken to hospital with head injuries after the incident in early October. Her son claims she was attacked by another resident. An inquest is due to be opened and adjourned into her death tomorrow. Here's our social affairs editor, Alison Holt.
For Richard Uridge, this box holds precious memories of his mother.
She was into knitting and embroidery and crochet.
Sheila Hartman lived a full life. Even in her later years, when she went blind and developed dementia, she kept busy.
A very thoughtful woman as well as a very practical woman. Some of the most recent pictures before she had to go into a care home.
Mrs. Hartman was living at Ridgeway Lodge Care Home in Dunstable. At the beginning of October, Richard got a call saying she'd been attacked in her bed early in the morning. She was taken to hospital.
Didn't look like Mum to start with. She had a significant number of head injuries. I was able to hold her hand and tell her how loved she was, and as a mum and as a grandma and as a great-grandma.
She died a few hours later at Luton and Dunstable Hospital. The police say inquiries are ongoing and confirm that a woman in her 90s was also taken to hospital and remains there. Mrs. Hartman's son claims she was attacked by another resident. The 2 staff who were on duty on the dementia floor were busy helping someone else. He says he has many questions, including about staffing levels and strain on the wider care system.
It's not about an individual who's attacked my mum, it's more for me about how we care for older people and whether we can do better to reduce the risk of this kind of thing happening. What's the bloody point of somebody dying in such horrifying circumstances if we don't use it as a wake-up call to say something's got to give, something's got to change?
HC1, which runs Ridgeway Lodge, says it's been deeply shocked and saddened by Mrs. Hartman's death. and that it's working closely with relevant authorities and the police to establish the full facts. The regulator is also carrying out an inspection. Alison Holt, BBC News.
The energy giant BP has reported another huge increase in profits. It made over £7 billion between July and September, more than double its earnings during the same period last year. The government is facing growing calls to expand the windfall tax on energy firms. Our business editor Simon Jack is here with more. Simon.
Thank you, Sophie. Yes, when customers' pain is some companies' gain, it understandably grabs the attention and prompts some important financial and political questions. As oil and gas prices have soared, the profits of those that sell it have done exactly the same. BP, as you heard there, announced profits of £7.1 billion for the 3 months to the end of September alone. So far this year, it has made profits of nearly £20 billion. Now, on that, they paid UK tax of around £2.2 billion, which includes £700 million in the new windfall tax introduced by Rishi Sunak when he was Chancellor. But many say that is not nearly enough.
They should be paying more, because it's not about, in absolute terms, what they're paying, because it will sound like a big number because they're making even more massive profits. What matters is whether or not they're paying their fair share. And that's something you judge by how much they're being taxed in other countries. And the UK, even with a windfall tax, taxes oil and gas companies like BP at a rate that is below the global average tax rate.
And it's important to remember that not all of BP's profits are taxable in the UK. In fact, only about 10% of their revenues come from UK operations. Any UK profits are already currently taxed at 65%. But companies can perfectly legally offset UK investment against those profits. So even if you put the tax at 100%, it could never fill the hole in public finances, estimated to be around £40 billion. That's a rough estimate of how much the government needs to shrink the gap between what it gets in tax and what it spends. And the Chancellor and Prime Minister are discussing, as we speak, how to do that, and will tell us on November the 17th of their autumn statement. So, what are the options?
There are two decisions here. The first is how much to do through increased taxes and how much to do through reduced spending, both obviously very painful. Previously, in the 2010s, it was nearly all done through reduced spending. Might make it harder now. So that's question one. Second, when do you do it? Do you do it immediately, which might be attractive because the markets want certainty, or do you do it later on? Well, you might well want to do it later on because there's so much uncertainty about actually how much needs to be done. So push it down the road will be an attractive option.
So it is tempting to put off those painful choices until after the next general election in 2024. But the markets, who remember lend the government money, may want to see some evidence now that they are in control of the public finances. Faith they lost after Liz Truss's mini-budget. Sophie.
Simon, thank you. The time is very nearly 6:20. Our top story this evening. The former Health Secretary Matt Hancock is suspended from the Conservative Party after signing up to a reality TV show. And coming up, British police officers will be travelling to Qatar to act as a go-between with England and Wales football fans and the authorities.
Also coming up here on BBC London, a baby bank charity tells us it knows some families having to ration nappies and skimping on meals. And why there's a pumpkin plea to help protect hedgehogs and plants.
Now, next week, voters in the United States will head to the polls for a major set of elections. They will be choosing members of Congress, America's Parliament. It's made up of the House of Representatives, which, like the House of Commons, makes laws, and the Senate, which, like the House of Lords, approves or blocks them. Currently, the Democrats have a majority in both houses. But if the Republicans win one of the chambers of Congress, President Biden will find it difficult to get laws passed. And there are plenty of divisive issues in the run-up to the vote, including the economy, crime and abortion. The former President Donald Trump is also very much in the mix, still a major factor in these elections. Many of the Republican candidates seeking votes don't believe Trump lost the presidential election in 2020. The focus is on key races in a handful of states, including Arizona, from where our correspondent John Sudworth sent this report.
Arizona's rugged landscapes speak to its place on America's old Wild West frontier. Today, though, it's the politics that's wild.
Some of the most corrupt elections we've ever seen.
With the state at the vanguard of the Republican Party's stolen election claim.
You're across the pond and you think you know about our election.
Well, I'm saying the audit here. The audit showed Biden won,
Let me just say one thing. If you think you're going to come over here and tell us how things are operating, you got another thing coming.
Candidates who deny the legitimacy of the last election are now running for the job of administering the next one, with the power potentially to decide which votes count. You are still convinced that the result of the 2020 election was not sound?
Wholly convinced.
Had you held this position in 2020 and had the result of that election been on your desk here in Arizona, what would you have done?
Well, first of all, make sure that there were not votes that were outside of the law counted.
So this is the tabulation room where every single early ballot will be tabulated.
It's a system under siege, with election workers facing death threats and deluged by allegations without evidence.
It's one of the most preposterous allegations that you would think, nobody would give any credence to, but that built up a significant following and still has people that believe in it, is that we took ballots from the 2020 election, we fed them to chickens, and then we incinerated the chickens to cover the tracks.
Given all of that, how worried are you about the future health of this democracy?
I'm deeply worried.
Not everyone's glued to the politics, but it's never far away. Arizona was once a solidly Republican state, but like elsewhere in America, traditional conservatism is now grappling with rapid social change. The myth of this stolen election is all about division, and it suggests something fundamental is being lost here. A readiness to accept that people with values that you oppose could ever legitimately win a majority.
Anybody think we're not in a war? That this civil war hasn't already begun?
But while far-right groups make inflammatory claims of war,
into economic collapse.
This meeting is sparsely attended, and a local Democrat candidate has even accepted an invitation to speak.
Okay. All right, it's not.
The democratic process somehow struggles on for now. In this state, though, it's clear how this country's political fault lines are deepening. And in an election in which democracy itself is on the ballot, the polls are close. John Sudworth, BBC News, Arizona.
The supermarket Morrisons is planning to close 132 of its loss-making McColl's convenience stores, putting 1,300 jobs at risk. The decision comes after Morrisons agreed to buy the McColl's chain out of administration in May. Morrisons says workers who could be made redundant will be offered jobs elsewhere in the business. The American rapper Takeoff has been shot dead in Houston, Texas. The 28-year-old was killed on a balcony outside a bowling alley as guests attended a private party. The Grammy-nominated star was a member of the rap trio Migos alongside Quavo and Offset, both of whom were at the scene of the attack. In less than 3 weeks, the Football World Cup gets underway in Qatar, the first time the tournament has ever been held in the Middle East. British police officers will be going to Qatar to act as a buffer between supporters from England and Wales and the law enforcers in Qatar, where laws are much stricter. Our sports editor Dan Roan reports.
Preparations gathering pace in Doha today as the city braces itself for the arrival of more than 1 million football fans later this month. Amid heightened security here, some 3,000 supporters from both England and Wales are expected to travel to Qatar for the World Cup. And earlier, at a Foreign Office briefing, police chiefs revealed so-called engagement officers would be deployed to help defuse potential flashpoints.
The potential risk is that people not wishing to be offensive or cause offence could act in a way that would be perceived by local law enforcement, that there's a misunderstanding there. So that's why we're really keen that the British officers who go are really a buffer and cultural interpreters.
Some might interpret these as morality police. Is that the case?
Absolutely not. No. We're not there to tell people how to behave. We don't have powers. We're not there to enforce local laws.
Qatar's been conducting security drills in Doha and will be supported through the tournament by thousands of Turkish riot police amid concerns over fans drinking outside designated zones and acting inappropriately.
The only concern we can have is that the natural exuberance of our fans, the natural joie de vivre of our fans to go out and enjoy themselves may cross some sort of invisible lines in Qatari culture. But we think our fans will be ambassadors for the country.
Major sports events always pose a security headache, but what was reinforced here today was the unique challenge that this World Cup will represent, with all fans concentrated in one city effectively and in a country with no experience of policing anything on this scale. Last week, LGBT rights campaigner Peter Tatchell was stopped by officials from protesting in Doha. The Foreign Secretary James Cleverly then criticised for saying gay fans would have to respect the values of a country where same-sex activity is illegal.
It's very sad, actually. Free Lions Pride, that represent that community as travelling England fans, when we last spoke to them, I don't think any were going. They don't feel safe, they don't feel comfortable, and they don't feel reassured, and that's incredibly disappointing that FIFA can put a tournament in a country that won't welcome those people.
Organisers insist that all will be welcome at what FIFA claims will be the best World Cup ever, but the questions and controversies that have hung over the build-up to this tournament show no sign of abating. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
The ball used by Diego Maradona to score his Hand of God goal against England at the 1986 World Cup is going to be sold at auction, and it's thought it could fetch £3 million. Our correspondent Nesta McGregor has been to Wembley, where it's on display before it goes under the hammer.
The centre of attention, on display at Wembley, the home of English football, 36 years after causing England's players and fans so much heartache.
Maradona just walked away from Huddle then.
Mexico City 1986 World Cup quarter-final, England versus Argentina. 0-0 until Diego Maradona decided to take matters into his own hands, punching the ball beyond the onrushing Peter Shilton. The ball seen crossing the line has been in the cupboard of the Tunisian referee until now.
Do you admit it was a mistake, and is there any guilt about now profiting from that decision?
I don't feel any guilt at this point, and the infamous hand of God is part of the game, and in football there is no guilt whatsoever if you think you made the right decision.
In contrast, Maradona's second goal was one of the greatest the world's ever seen. His team won the game 2-1, and the striker eventually went on to lift the trophy.
He won't need any of them. Oh, you have to say that's magnificent.
England's players were left to lift each other's spirits.
People have said they can't get close or touch it. Could you?
Well, I didn't on the day, and I'm not going to try now. No, it's iconic. It's amazing seeing it, and it's in the memory bank, and good memories and bad memories.
Earlier this year, the shirt worn by Diego Maradona in that match sold at auction for more than £7 million. The ball is expected to fetch upwards of £2.5 million. There's likely to be no shortage of bidders eager to own a piece of the Hand of God, but they'll have to put their own hands deep in their pockets. Nesta McGregor, BBC News.
Now, which word do you think sums up 2022? This year has seen the war in Ukraine, political instability, the death of Queen Elizabeth II, and natural disasters, to name a few. Well, Collins Dictionary has chosen permacrisis as its word of the year. The publisher says it sums up succinctly just how truly awful 2022 has been for so many people. Partygate is another word much used this year. It also makes the top 10, as does Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and Carolean, the word used to mark the beginning of the reign of King Charles III. And Matt Taylor is here. He has another one for us.
I do. How about splooting? Yes, this is where our pets this summer were spread-eagled, including my dog Bert there on the right, to keep cool in the heat. And I think some of them were at it in October as well. The Met Office today revealing that all parts of the UK saw well above average temperatures. Fourth warmest October in England. And so far, we're on track to the warmest year on record for the UK. As for rainfall, we needed it. Well, it was only Northern Ireland substantially above normal as far as rainfall's concerned. More rain, though, to come over the next few days. But the next 36 hours is about the wind. Widespread gales, and in these hatched areas here, this is where we could see potentially damaging gusts of wind, all linked into this lump of cloud. That's a developing low-pressure system. But even before it gets to us, lots of cloud across the UK at the moment. Heavy, thundery showers working their way eastwards, easing for the second half of the night for many. And as skies fall clear, winds fall a little bit lighter, certainly lighter than last night for some of you. It's going to be one of the colder nights of the week. Temperatures well down into single figures, 2 or 3 degrees through some sheltered glens in Scotland. But it will lead to a fine start for many before our developing area of low pressure, as it moves in, starts to bring that increasingly wet and wild weather. Northern Ireland through the morning, and then into parts of the afternoon, through parts of western Scotland, later into western areas of England and Wales with those strengthening winds. Away from that, those sunny start, sunshine lasting longest through East Anglia, the southeast and the Channel Islands. Here we'll stay dry until we head into the evening. It's going to feel cool out there in the strength of the wind, which will be at strongest later in the day. Strongest winds transferring into Scotland as we go through Wednesday night into Thursday. Rain sweeping eastwards, and on Thursday that could linger across some parts of East Anglia, the southeast and the Channel Islands. A day of sunshine and showers elsewhere, but a cooler day for all, even in the sunshine, and it will stay cool on Friday before more wet and windy weather arrives for bonfire night on Saturday. Sophie.
Matt, thank you. And that's it from the BBC News at 6 on the 1st of November. You can keep up to date with all the latest developments on the BBC website. But from the 6 team, it's goodbye. Now the news continues here on BBC One with our teams across the nations and regions. Goodbye.